Before we begin, this story contains descriptions of the deaths of children, including drowning. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. June 15, 1904. East River, New York. A mother on the burning deck of the General SLO Cum strapped a life preserver around her daughter's chest and threw her into the water. Her daughter sank. Inside the life preserver, hidden in the cork, was an 8-ounce iron bar. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, a steamboat loaded with women and children, a fire that couldn't be stopped, and a life preserver with an iron heart. The General SLO Cum was a 3-decked side-wheel steamboat, 264 feet long, painted white. She ran excursions on the East River out of Manhattan, parks, picnic grounds, summer outings. On June 15, 1904, she was carrying 1,358 passengers and 30 crew on the 17th consecutive annual picnic excursion of St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church. The heart of Little Germany, Manhattan's German immigrant neighborhood on the Lower East Side. The passengers who boarded that morning were almost entirely women and children. Their husbands and fathers had gone to work. They wore white picnic dresses and Sunday clothes. They carried wicker baskets packed with food for a day out on Long Island. It was a clear, warm Wednesday morning in early summer. The congregation had been making this same trip for 17 years. Nothing about the morning felt unusual. The fire started around 10 in the morning in the forward cabin under the main deck, a storage room that doubled as a lamp oil refueling station. The United States Commission of Investigation would later document that oil had been spilled on the floor of that room numerous times, that the crew habitually used open flames inside it, and that oil-soaked rags and loose straw had been allowed to accumulate there. What it was, essentially, was a fire waiting for a reason. A 12-year-old boy discovered the smoke first. He ran to the pilot house to tell Captain William Van Schaik. Van Schaik didn't believe him. By the time a crew member confirmed the fire, it had already spread beyond the lamp room. The crew ran to the standpipe, the ship's firefighting connection on deck, grabbed the hose and turned on the water. The hose was 100 feet of cheap, unlined linen. It had been hanging on that ship for 13 years, exposed to weather, never replaced. It burst apart in their hands. The crew then tried to attach a rubber backup hose to the standpipe fitting. It wouldn't connect. They stood at a working water supply with no way to move water to the fire. They gave up. The General SLO Cum had no working fire suppression equipment, and the fire knew it. There's a detail worth sitting with for a moment. St. Mark's had been making this exact trip for 17 consecutive years. The same ship, the same summer morning, the same community gathering. Grandmothers and young mothers and children who'd made this journey since they were infants. For the congregation of Little Germany, this wasn't a special occasion. It was a tradition as familiar as church itself. Van Schaik had a decision to make. The fire was spreading through the forward cabin. He was on the East River, passing populated Manhattan shoreline on both sides, piers, docks, fire departments within reach. He could beach the ship, get the passengers off, let the city handle the rest. Instead, he ordered full speed ahead, and that decision changed everything that followed. At full speed, the headwind fanned the fire forward and then aft, from the lamp room up through the main deck and onto the hurricane deck above. What had been a fire in one room became a ship on fire from bow to stern. Passengers crowded away from the flames, pushing toward the aft end, toward the stern railing, compressing themselves into the back quarter of the ship. They grabbed for the life preservers hanging from hooks above the deck. The canvas covers, faded and cracked from 13 years exposed to weather, split open in their hands. Inside, granulated cork, not solid cork blocks, but cork dust, the broken-down remnant of material that had deteriorated over more than a decade. It scattered in the wind. Mothers didn't stop to examine what they'd found. The fire was 30 feet away. The river was right there. They strapped what remained of the life preservers onto their children, tightened the fittings as best they could, and threw them into the East River. The children sank. Inside each of those life preservers, hidden inside what was left of the cork, was an 8-ounce iron bar. The non-per-rel cork works, the manufacturer, had placed them there deliberately. Federal regulations at the time required life preserver cork to weigh at least 6 pounds, a standard designed to ensure enough real cork was present to provide buoyancy. Non-per-rel's cork was cheap, low-density material that didn't meet the weight requirement on its own. So they added iron bars to bring the weight up. The preservers passed the scale. They just couldn't float. The iron was the only thing in them that met spec. She strapped the life preserver around her daughter's chest. She kissed her. She threw her into the water, and she watched her sink. Most passengers on the General SLOCUM couldn't swim. In 1904, that was typical. Swimming lessons weren't common in working-class immigrant communities. The East River wasn't a place you swam in. It was a place you worked on or crossed. The mothers who strapped life preservers onto their children weren't making a desperate gamble. They were following the only safety instruction that existed. It was supposed to work. By the time Van Schaik beached the General SLOCUM on the shore of North Brother Island, a small island in the East River that housed Riverside Hospital, the ship had been burning for nearly 20 minutes. The fire had long since won, but the full cost wasn't over yet. North Brother Island was occupied. Hospital staff, patients, and a construction crew on the grounds ran to the water's edge when they saw the burning ship coming toward shore. They formed human chains, waded into the shallows, and pulled people from the water by hand. 2 tugboats arrived minutes after the beaching and began pulling more survivors from the river. But most of the living passengers had crowded to the aft end of the ship, the stern section still deep in the water on the island's far side. The hurricane deck, overloaded with hundreds of people pressed into its aft quarter, gave way. Hundreds went into the river at once. The sidewheel paddles, still churning at full speed when the ship went aground, kept turning. Passengers who jumped from the aft section into the water beside the wheel were struck by the blades. The ship caught the current, broke free from the shore, and drifted east. She sank off Hunts Point in the Bronx. When the count was done, 1,021 people were dead, 955 passengers, 2 crew. A number of victims who were never identified. 175 were injured. Just 228 walked away unharmed. It was the worst maritime disaster in the history of New York City, and the deadliest in American waters since the Civil War. Reverend George Haas had organized this trip every year for 17 years. He'd built the tradition, announced it from the pulpit each June, watched his congregation board the General SLOCUM summer after summer. He was on the ship that morning. He survived. His wife and daughter did not. The investigation began within days. The USCI assembled its investigators and started pulling apart every decision made by every person with responsibility for that ship. And what they found went well beyond the captain. One discovery in particular changed the meaning of everything that had happened that morning. On May 5, 1904, 6 weeks before the fire, the General SLOCUM had undergone its annual safety inspection. The inspectors certified that the ship's fire hoses were in good working order. They certified that the life preservers were adequate and properly stored. They noted the lifeboats as present and accounted for. What they did not report: the fire hoses were rotted linen that hadn't been replaced in over a decade. What they did not report: the life preservers were packed with iron bars and granulated cork dust. What they did not report, because nobody during the inspection actually tried to launch one, was that the lifeboats had been wired in place and painted over so many times that they couldn't be freed from their mounts. Every item certified safe had been fraudulent for years. The inspection existed not to test whether the equipment worked, but to provide legal certification that it had been checked. The stamp of approval was the product. The safety was incidental. David Kahn Weiler's Sons, a cork inspection firm, found the iron bars inside the non-PUREL Cork Works shipments during the post-disaster investigation. Non-PUREL's managers were indicted for fraud. They were never convicted. Captain Van Schaik was convicted of criminal negligence in 1906 and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He served 3.5 years before receiving a presidential pardon in 1912. No one from the Nik Steamboat Company, the Federal Inspection Service, or non-pure REL Cork Works served a single day. There's a term for what the General SLO disaster exposed. Safety theatre, the performance of safety rather than its practice, rules that exist on paper, inspections that certify equipment nobody tested, stamps of approval issued because the process requires stamps, not because the process requires safety. 1,021 people died because every layer of protection between those passengers and the East River had been hollowed out. The life preservers, the fire hoses, the lifeboats, the inspections. And nobody in any position of authority had ever looked inside. There is also the story of what happened after. Little Germany, the neighborhood that put most of its women and children on the General SLO that morning, didn't recover. Families moved away. Survivors couldn't stay in apartments where the grief had a face on every floor. The church that organized the trip for 17 years eventually closed. The German immigrant community that had existed on Manhattan's Lower East Side for generations was gone within a decade. Not destroyed by the fire, erased by what the fire left behind. The General Slocum is not a story most people know by name. It should be. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. That was The Unlit Room. See you in the dark.